Have you noticed how suddenly everything is carbon neutral, net zero, or even climate positive? Your flight, your food delivery, your favorite tech brand, all claiming that if they emit carbon, they simply pay to remove it again. But here's the uncomfortable question: is this really climate action, or have we just invented a very sophisticated way to greenwash business as usual? Today I'm going to unpack the new obsession with carbon removal, companies paying for forest, biochar, and futuristic machines that suck CO2 from the air, and ask, when does this help the planet? And when it is just a license to keep polluting, we will be discussing about it. Because regulators in Europe are literally banning carbon neutral claims that rely on offset, and big companies like Microsoft are signing deals for tens of millions of tons of carbon removal. So we are turning point. Either carbon removal becomes a powerful part of a real climate action, or it becomes the next big greenwashing scandal. Let's get into it. But before that, let's watch the intro.
Sing it loud, let's unite on the sustainability side. Feel the love day and night. Let's turn the tides, make a change today. Together we define our sustainable way. With every step we take, we rise and glow on the sustainability side. Let the give us flow.
Welcome to the sustainability side, where sustainability, innovation, and business meet in real conversations that anyone can act on. I'm your host, Dr. Sama, and the executive director of this podcast and publication project. Each episode here connects goals, climate science, real world case studies, and the sustainable development goals in a way that practical for professionals, founders, and students across all over the world. In today's episode, we have kept the title is Carbon Removal Just Greenwashing, and I'll walk you through step by step. We will be exploring what carbon removal actually is and why it appears in every 1.5-degree climate pathway, how companies use carbon removal credits to offset their emission instead of reducing them, fresh international samples from Microsoft and Stripe to new EU rules that literally outlaw some offset based green claims, and finally, how to tell the difference between genuine climate leadership and clever marketing. If you are watching this on YouTube, hit like, subscribe, and drop your first reaction in the comments. Carbon removal, is it a solution, scam, or somewhere in between? That engagement really helps with this content reach more people who care about climate truth. And if you are listening to this in Spotify, iTunes, or any other podcasting platforms, well, you can always reach out to our social media platforms to share your opinion. So let's start by demystifying the term carbon dioxide removal, CDR, which means taking CO2 that is already in the atmosphere and storing it for a longer time so it doesn't contribute to the global warming. This can help through natural based methods by restoring forest, improving soil carbon, and restoring wetlands. Another method is by technical methods, which is like direct air capture machines, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, or turning CO2 into mineral or stable biochar. So the global climate science, especially the IPCC pathways, is very clear. It is to keep warming to around 1.5 degree. A human cost emission must fall fast, and we still need a limited amount of carbon removal to deal with the hard to abate emission and to correct for overshoot. A 2024 analysis led by University of East Anglia found that even if all current countries' plans are fully diverted, total human driven removals would increase by only about zero point 0.5 gigatons of CO2 by 2030 and 1.9 gigatons by 2050, far below roughly 1.5 additional gigatons needed in typical 1.5-degree pathways. The gap is very huge, so the carbon removal is necessary, but as this is our central theme, It is supposed to complement deep cuts in emission, not replace them. Greenwashing happens when the environmental claims look impressive but don't match reality. In carbon markets, several investigations have shown offset credits that did not truly reduce or remove carbon emission. For example, forest projects that were overcredited or later burned, or projects that would have happened anyway. Researchers studying offset markets talk about carbon scandals, credits that are not additional, not permanent, or not properly measured. If companies emit 1 ton of CO2 but buys a worthless credit, the atmosphere still has the extra ton, but the company gets to put a big screen label on its website claiming to be, eco-friendly or like zero carbon emission. All this stuff, you might have come across that very quite frequently. So the European NGOs want that if carbon removal is used as a simple offset, 1 ton in, 1 ton out, it can delay the deep reductions we need now. They highlight a key problem, which is permanence. Fossil CO2 affects the climate for hundreds to thousands of years, but many nature based removals might last only a few decades if forests are cut, burned, or degraded. This tension is exactly why European unions has started to change the rules. In 2024, the EU agreed the environmental claims like climate neutral or climate positive that rely purely on offset will be banned for products, and as a 2026 customer or consumer directed now bans using generic green claims or carbon neutral marketing without solid verifiable reduction in a company's own value chain. In simple language, in Europe, just buying offset is no longer enough to call your product climate friendly or eco friendly. Regulators are essentially saying, show your real emission cuts first, right? It makes sense. This is a big global signal. It tells us the era of cheap, low quality offsets as a marketing tool is ending, and that's where high stakes questions about carbon removal starts. Let's start with Microsoft. In early 2026, Microsoft announced that in 2025, it has signed carbon removal agreement worth 45 million tons of CO2, more than double its previous contract volume. This makes it one of the world's largest buyer of carbon removal. Microsoft has pledged to the carbon negativity by 2030 and to remove all its historical emission by 2050 using a portfolio that mixes nature-based projects and advanced technologies. However, critics note that Microsoft emission from its rapidly growing cloud and AI data centers operations which have been rising, and that the company still actively supports fossil fuel customers through its software and cloud services. So the question becomes, are these 45 million tons of removal backing a serious internal decarbonization plan, or it is just helping to mask growth in energy intensive operations? I'd invite you to listen to ask if Microsoft couldn't buy any offset or carbon removal at all, how fast could it still reduce its emission? That's a good mental test for any companies, I would say.
What is a pickle? To some, it's just a condiment. To us, it is time captured, ancient herbal wisdom of the land, distilled in 100% pure ingredients. From the blood purifying depth of bitter gourd to the restorative strength of the pirandai stem, we bottle nature's boldest essence. This is not just pickle. This is tradition, purity. This is heritage, preserved, crafted by nature, perfected by time.
Let's move on to the Stripe and how Shopify and Frontier are doing it. Now, these companies, especially in 2022, Stripe, Shopify, Alphabet, Meta, and McKinsey launched Frontier, a nearly $925 million advance market commitment to buy high quality, durable carbon removal by 2030. This isn't a typical cheap offset scheme, it is more likely climate R&D finance disguised as procurement. In one round, Stripe and Shopify together committed around $11 million to purchase just over 7,000 tons of carbon removal from early stage projects at price ranging from about 227 to over $1,300 per ton. These projects includes enhanced rock weathering, mineralization of CO2 in nine tails, capturing CO2 from seawater, and other novel approaches. At those prices, nobody is pretending they have solved the emission. It's explicitly framed as learning by doing to bring down cost over time. This case shows that carbon removal spending can be honest and high integrated if it is presented as innovation and beyond value chain climate contribution, not as full cancellation of a company's own footprint. Let's connect all this to the Sustainable Development Goals. Carbon removal clearly links to SDG 13 and climate action, but depending on how it is done, it can support or undermine other goals like SDG 17, Sustainable Development Goal 7 on clean energy, and Sustainable Development Goal 12 on responsible consumption and production. Sustainable Development Goal 15 on life and land, and SDG 10, which is about reduced inequalities. A 2024 study on the carbon removal ambition gap showed that current national plans under delivery massively compared to 1.5-degree pathways. That means we are relying even more on voluntary markets and corporate initiatives, which we have seen as vulnerable to greenwashing if rules are weak. On the other justice side, large-scale bioenergy with carbon capture or monoculture tree plantation can compete with food production, water, land rights, and biodiversity, especially in the global south. Communities can be displayed in the name of carbon, which might tick the Sustainable Development Goal 13 box, but harm the Sustainable Development Goal 1, which is on poverty, and 2, which is on hunger, and of course 15, which is about the ecosystem. For listeners in India and across the global south, this is crucial as our governments design new carbon market rules and ESG disclosure norms like BRSR. We have a chance to build in high integrated guardrails from day one, learning from the scandals already documented in older offset system. Done wisely, carbon removal projects here can create local jobs, restore degraded land, and support multiple sustainable development goals at once. Done badly, they just turn lands and forests into carbon accounting tools for companies in the global north. So, how do we separate genuine climate actions from greenwashing? First, follow the mitigation hierarchy. Serious standards like the science based targets initiatives make it clear companies must prioritize deep value chain emission reductions. Only then we can work on the removal so it could be used to neutralize the final hard to abate portion. If a company's emissions are flat or rising but removal purchases are skyrocketing, that's the big red flag. Second, look at the quality of removals. Independent research and NGO emphasize three basics. Additionally, the project wouldn't happen without the credit revenue. Then the accurate measurements is necessary and the durability matching the lifetime of emissions, especially for fossil fuel CO2. For long lived fossil emission, this often means storage over centuries, not just a decades. Third, watch the language. The new European Union rules explicit ban vague green claims like eco-friendly or climate neutral, as we have discussed before, when they rely on offset alone. If a company is still using such slogans without hard numbers on actual reduction and only generic reference to planting trees somewhere, and then that's a sign of a pure greenwashing. And finally, co-benefits and the governance, I would say. High integrated carbon removal projects engage local communities, respects land rights, and track biodiversity and social impacts, aligning with several sustainable development goals simultaneously. If communities on the ground are protesting a carbon farm, you can be sure something is off. Before we close, here are a few quick filters you can use as a professional or a consumer whenever you see carbon removal or a carbon neutral claims. Number one being like, does the company publish a clear pathway showing a real emission reductions year by year, or does everything depends on offset at the end? Number two, are these projects named with independent standards and transparent registries, or are they just buzzwords like supporting reforestation? Third, is the local of removal described honestly as dealing with residual emission, or framed as we have cancelled out everything? Problem solved. This mindset. So, with this thing, you can simply have the answers, and if all the answers are vague, that is your cue to be skeptical. So, is carbon removal just greenwashing on its own terms? No. Science tell us we do need carbon removal, but only after we have done the hard working of cutting emissions as deeply and quickly as possible. It becomes greenwashing when companies use it as a shortcut, a financial trick to avoid changing their core business models. So, if you found out this episode useful, here is how you can support this work on YouTube. Please like this video, of course, subscribe to our channel, the Sustainability Site, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss future deep dives. Share this episode with one colleague or a friend who works in ESG, climate change policies, or business strategies, especially someone wrestling with net zero targets. And tell me in the comments, share one example where you think a company used carbon removal responsibly and one that felt like greenwashing. I'll feature some of your examples in a follow up episode and our written publication. You're listening to us in Spotify, iTunes, or any podcast platforms. You can express your comments. You can be a part of our growing LinkedIn community. Join our group and express your opinions. For more resources, check the description. I have linked them. For more resources, stay tuned. Thank you for turning into the sustainability. And I'm your host, Dr. Sama. Until next time, keep asking tough questions about every carbon neutral label you see. And until then, take care, stay tuned, inspired only on the sustainability side.
Feel the joy, let's unite on the sustainability side. Making waves, shining light. From the city streets to the open skies, together we rise with a love that defies.